I never believed in intuition until that night in September. My name is Jake, and I've been running this 200-acre wheat farm in rural Kansas for 15 years. It's the kind of place where your nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, and the only sounds at night are crickets and the occasional coyote howl. Max, my 4-year-old German shepherd, had been my constant companion since he was 8 weeks old. He wasn't just a pet. He was my working partner, my early warning system, and honestly, my best friend. German shepherds are known for their intelligence and loyalty, but Max seemed to have an extra sense about things that always amazed me. That particular evening had been unusually warm for late September. The temperature had hit 89 degrees during the day, and even by sunset, it was still hovering around 75. The weather forecast had mentioned dry conditions and high winds expected overnight. As a farmer, you learn to pay attention to these details. They can mean the difference between a successful harvest and disaster. I'd spent the day checking the irrigation systems and making sure everything was ready for what promised to be our best wheat harvest in 5 years. The golden stalks were nearly ready, standing tall and proud across the rolling fields. After a quick dinner of leftover pot roast, I settled into my favorite armchair with a farming magazine, Max curled up at my feet as usual. By 10 p.m., I was ready for bed. Max followed me through our nightly routine, checking the barn, securing the equipment, and making sure all the gates were properly latched. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The night was calm, almost eerily quiet. Deep sleep came easily that night. The physical exhaustion from farm work always guaranteed solid rest. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., I was jolted awake by the most frantic barking I'd ever heard from Max. This wasn't his usual alert bark when a raccoon got into the garbage or when the mail truck arrived. This was desperate, urgent, almost panicked. Max was downstairs, and I could hear his claws scratching against the hardwood floor as he paced back and forth. I stumbled out of bed, still groggy, and called down the stairs. "Max! What's wrong, boy? Settle down!" But he didn't settle down. If anything, the barking became more intense. I could hear him running from window to window, his bark echoing through the house with an urgency that made my stomach tighten with worry. Pulling on my jeans and boots, I hurried downstairs. Max was at the kitchen window that faced the north field, his front paws up on the sill, barking at something outside. His entire body was trembling with agitation, his ears pinned back, tail rigid. "What is it, Max?" I asked, moving to the window beside him. At first, I couldn't see anything unusual. The moonlight cast long shadows across the farmyard, and everything looked exactly as it should. The barn stood silent and dark. The equipment shed was secure, and the fence lines were intact. But Max wasn't calming down. He looked up at me with those intelligent brown eyes, then back out the window, then at me again. It was clear he was trying to tell me something important. I opened the kitchen door, and Max bolted outside like a shot. He ran about 20 feet toward the north field, then stopped and looked back at me, barking once sharply as if to say, "Come on, follow me!" That's when I smelled it. Smoke. Not the pleasant smell of a fireplace or campfire, but the acrid, dangerous smell of something burning that shouldn't be. My heart rate immediately spiked as I stepped fully outside, scanning the darkness for any sign of fire. The wind had picked up significantly since I'd gone to bed. I could feel it pushing against my back, coming from the south and blowing steadily toward the north. That's when the full implications hit me. If there was a fire anywhere on the property, this wind would spread it rapidly across the dry fields. Max was still barking, now running in circles between me and the direction of the north field. His behavior was becoming more frantic by the second. I grabbed the powerful flashlight from the kitchen counter and followed him into the yard. As we moved away from the house, the smell of smoke grew stronger. Max led me past the barn, past the equipment shed, toward the fence line that separated our farmyard from the wheat field. The closer we got, the more agitated he became. Then I saw it. In the distance, maybe 300 yards away, there was an orange glow dancing against the horizon. My worst nightmare was unfolding before my eyes. The wheat field was on fire. "Oh God, no," I whispered, but there was no time for panic. I sprinted back to the house, Max right beside me, and grabbed my cell phone from the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911, but I forced myself to speak clearly. "This is Jake Morrison at 4847 County Road 15. I have a wheat field fire, and it's spreading fast with high winds. I need the fire department immediately." The dispatcher's calm voice was reassuring. "We're dispatching units now, Mr. Morrison. Are you and any family members safe?" "It's just me and my dog." "We're safe for now, but the fire is moving toward my buildings." "Stay away from the fire, sir. Help is on the way." But I couldn't just stand there and wait. Every farmer knows that in a situation like this, every minute counts. I had to try to create some kind of fire break to protect the barn and house. I ran to the equipment shed and fired up the tractor, grateful that I always kept it fueled and ready. Max jumped into the cab beside me, something he'd done countless times during regular farm work. His presence was oddly comforting, even in this crisis. The tractor's headlights illuminated the scene ahead as we drove toward the field. The fire had already consumed about 2 acres of wheat and was spreading rapidly. The wind was pushing it directly toward the farm buildings, just as I'd feared. I began plowing a fire break, turning the soil to create a barrier of bare earth between the advancing flames and the structures I needed to protect. The heat was intense, even from a distance. As I worked the tractor back and forth, creating furrows of turned earth, I could see the fire's behavior changing with the wind gusts. When the wind died down, the flames would settle to a steady burn. But when it picked up, the fire would leap forward hungrily, consuming everything in its path. Max stayed alert in the cab, his eyes fixed on the advancing flames. Occasionally, he would whine softly, as if he understood the gravity of our situation. His earlier frantic barking had saved us precious time that might mean the difference between losing just the field or losing everything. The sound of sirens in the distance was the most beautiful thing I'd heard all night. Within minutes, I could see the flashing red lights of the fire trucks bouncing along the county road toward my farm. The volunteer fire department was small, but experienced with rural fires. I continued plowing until the first truck arrived, then shut down the tractor and ran to meet the fire chief. Tom Bradley had been fighting fires in our county for 20 years, and his calm demeanor immediately made me feel more hopeful. "How long has it been burning?" he asked, already assessing the situation. "I discovered it maybe 20 minutes ago, but it could have been going longer. My dog woke me up with his barking." Tom nodded approvingly. "Smart dog. That early warning probably saved your buildings. We'll set up water lines and work on containment. You did good with that fire break." The firefighters moved with practiced efficiency, unrolling hoses and positioning equipment. For the next 3 hours, I watched as the volunteer firefighters battled the blaze. They worked in teams, some attacking the fire directly with water and foam, others creating additional fire breaks with specialized equipment they'd brought. Max and I stayed well back from the action, but close enough to help if needed. I provided the firefighters with detailed maps of the property, showing them where the irrigation lines were located and which areas had the driest vegetation. The fire was stubborn. Just when it seemed like one section was under control, the wind would shift and send sparks flying to ignite new patches of wheat. It was like fighting a living thing that kept adapting and finding new ways to spread. Around 5 a.m., Chief Bradley approached me with an update. "We've got the main body of the fire contained, but we'll need to stay here for several more hours to make sure it doesn't flare up again." "Do you have any idea how this might have started?" I shook my head. "I checked everything before bed. All the equipment was shut down. No electrical issues that I know of. The weather's been dry, but we haven't had lightning." "We'll investigate once it's fully out," he assured me. "Sometimes these things start from the smallest spark. A piece of metal hitting a rock, a cigarette butt thrown from a passing car, even spontaneous combustion in certain conditions." As dawn broke, I could finally see the full extent of the damage. About 15 acres of wheat had been destroyed, but the fire break had held. The barn, house, and equipment shed were all safe. By 8 a.m., the fire was completely extinguished, but the firefighters continued monitoring for hot spots. The acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, and the blackened field looked like a war zone. But I was alive, my buildings were intact, and Max was safe beside me. Chief Bradley returned with news about the fire's origin. "We found the starting point about 400 yards from your buildings near the county road. Looks like someone threw a cigarette out of a car window. With the dry conditions and wind, it caught immediately." The senselessness of it made me angry. One careless act had destroyed weeks of work and thousands of dollars worth of crops. But it could have been so much worse. "If your dog hadn't woken you up when he did," the chief continued, "this fire would have reached your buildings before we could get here. You're lucky to have such a good early warning system." I looked down at Max, who was sitting calmly beside me, watching the firefighters pack up their equipment. His fur was singed in a few places from the heat and flying sparks, but he seemed proud of his role in the night's events. "He's more than lucky," I told the chief. "He's a hero." As the fire trucks pulled away, I surveyed the damage more carefully. 15 acres out of 200 wasn't catastrophic, but it was still a significant loss. The insurance would cover some of it, but there would be paperwork, delays, and the frustration of explaining how a cigarette butt had nearly destroyed my livelihood. Over the next few days, as I dealt with insurance adjusters and began planning the cleanup, I couldn't stop thinking about Max's behavior that night. How had he known about the fire before I did? Dogs have better hearing and smell than humans, but the fire had been hundreds of yards away when he first started barking. I called my veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Chen, to ask about it. She'd been treating farm animals in our area for over a decade and had seen plenty of unusual animal behavior. "Dogs can detect smoke at much lower concentrations than humans," she explained. "But what you're describing sounds like something more. Some animals seem to have an intuitive sense about danger that we don't fully understand." She told me about other cases she'd encountered. Horses that refused to enter a barn hours before it collapsed, cats that hid before earthquakes, dogs that detected medical emergencies before symptoms appeared. "Max probably saved your life," she said simply, "and definitely saved your property." The more I thought about it, the more grateful I became. Not just for Max's warning, but for the reminder that sometimes we need to trust things we can't fully explain. As farmers, we're used to relying on science, weather data, and careful planning. But that night taught me there's still room for intuition and instinct. I also realized how isolated I'd become on the farm. If Max hadn't been there, I might have slept through the entire fire until it was too late. Word of the fire spread quickly through our small farming community. By the weekend, neighbors I hadn't seen in months were stopping by to check on me and offer help with the cleanup. Jim Patterson, whose farm bordered mine to the east, brought his tractor and spent an entire day helping me clear the burned wheat stubble. "That's what neighbors do," he said when I tried to thank him. The local feed store owner, Martha Williams, organized a small fundraiser to help offset my losses. It wasn't much money, but the gesture meant everything. In a community where everyone faces the same risks, weather, fire, market fluctuations, people understand that today's victim could be tomorrow's helper. Max became something of a local celebrity. The county newspaper ran a story about the fire with the headline, "Hero Dog Saves Farm." They included a photo of Max sitting proudly in front of the barn, and I swear he seemed to understand that he was famous. Children from the local elementary school sent him handmade cards and dog treats. One little girl drew a picture of Max wearing a firefighter's helmet with the words, "Thank you for being brave," written in crayon. The attention was nice, but what really mattered was the reminder that we weren't alone out here. The farming community might be spread across miles of rural roads, but when crisis strikes, people come together. I started making more effort to stay connected with my neighbors, checking in during difficult weather and offering help when I could. The insurance settlement came through faster than I'd expected, and by October, I was able to replant the burned section with winter wheat. The new green shoots looked hopeful against the black soil, a symbol of renewal and resilience. Max had developed a new routine since the fire. Every evening, he would make a complete circuit of the property, nose to the ground, checking for anything unusual. It was as if he'd appointed himself the official fire prevention officer of our farm. I found myself paying more attention to his behavior, watching for the subtle signs that might indicate something was wrong. The experience had taught me to trust his instincts in a way I never had before. One evening in late October, as we walked the fence line together, I reflected on how much had changed since that night in September. The fire had been devastating, but it had also brought unexpected gifts, stronger community connections, a deeper appreciation for Max's intelligence, and a reminder that sometimes the most important warnings come from unexpected sources. The burned area was healing, slowly but surely. Nature has an amazing ability to recover from disaster, given time and the right conditions. The new wheat was growing strong, and I was confident that next year's harvest would be even better than the one we'd lost. As we headed back to the house, Max suddenly stopped and lifted his head, testing the air. For a moment, my heart raced, remembering that night in September. But then he relaxed and continued walking, apparently satisfied that all was well. Winter brought its own challenges, but also time for reflection. During the long evenings, I found myself researching the bond between humans and dogs, trying to understand what had happened that night. I learned that dogs have been working alongside humans for thousands of years, developing an almost supernatural ability to read our emotions and anticipate our needs. Military and police dogs are trained to detect explosives, drugs, and even diseases. Search and rescue dogs can find people buried under avalanches or collapsed buildings. But Max wasn't specially trained. He was just a farm dog who loved his home and wanted to protect it. That made his actions even more remarkable. I also discovered that many cultures have stories about animals warning humans of danger. From ancient Greece to modern Japan, there are accounts of dogs, cats, horses, and other animals displaying unusual behavior before earthquakes, fires, floods, and other disasters. Science is beginning to catch up with these old stories. Researchers have found that animals can detect subtle changes in air pressure, electromagnetic fields, and chemical concentrations that humans miss entirely. They're living early warning systems, if we're smart enough to pay attention. Max seemed to sense my new appreciation for his abilities. He became more confident, more assertive about investigating anything that seemed out of place. I encouraged this behavior, knowing that his vigilance was one of our best defenses against future disasters. The relationship between us had evolved from simple companionship to true partnership. When spring arrived, the winter wheat in the replanted section was thriving. The green shoots were thick and healthy, promising an excellent harvest. The contrast with the surrounding older wheat was barely noticeable now. Nature had healed the scar left by the fire. Max and I resumed our regular routines of checking irrigation lines, monitoring crop growth, and maintaining equipment. But there was a new awareness in our daily work, a heightened attention to potential dangers that hadn't been there before. I installed additional smoke detectors around the property and created more fire breaks near the buildings. The county fire department asked me to speak at a safety seminar for other farmers, sharing lessons learned from our experience. The most important thing, I told the group, is to pay attention to your animals. They often know things before we do. Several farmers nodded in agreement, sharing their own stories of animals acting strangely before storms, equipment failures, or other problems. It was clear that Max and I weren't unique. The partnership between farmers and their animals has always included this element of mutual protection. As the weather warmed, Max's evening patrols became more thorough. He'd developed specific routes around the property, checking the same spots in the same order every night. It was like watching a professional security guard making his rounds. I started carrying a flashlight on these walks, partly for safety, but mostly because I enjoyed seeing the farm through Max's eyes, alert, protective, and deeply connected to every acre. By midsummer, the replanted wheat was ready for harvest. As I combined the grain from the section that had burned the previous year, I was amazed by the quality and quantity. The fire had actually enriched the soil, and the new crop was some of the best I'd ever grown. Max rode with me in the combine, just as he had during countless other harvests. But this time felt different, more meaningful somehow. We were harvesting hope from disaster, proving that with time and care, even the worst setbacks can lead to new growth. The local newspaper wanted to do a follow-up story about our recovery, but I declined. The real story wasn't about the fire or the insurance or the community support, though all of those things mattered. The real story was about trust, learning to trust the instincts of a loyal companion who saw danger before I did. That evening, as we finished the harvest celebration with neighbors and friends, I watched Max playing with the children who had sent him cards after the fire. He was gentle and patient, letting them pet him and pose for pictures. But I could see that part of his attention was always focused on the perimeter, watching for anything that might threaten his territory. As the sun set and the guests headed home, Max and I began our evening patrol. The routine that had started as a response to trauma had become a peaceful way to end each day, a chance to appreciate the land we shared and the partnership that protected it. 2 years have passed since that night in September, and Max is now 6 years old, still young for a German Shepherd, but showing the wisdom that comes from experience. The burned section of the farm has become the most productive area on the property, a testament to nature's ability to transform disaster into opportunity. I've learned to read Max's signals with much greater accuracy. When he's concerned about something, I pay attention immediately. When he's relaxed, I know our little corner of Kansas is safe. This partnership has made me a better farmer and a more observant person. The fire taught us both valuable lessons about vigilance, community, and the importance of trusting our instincts. But perhaps the most important lesson was about the depth of the bond between humans and animals, a connection that goes far beyond simple companionship to become a true partnership in survival. Max saved more than just buildings and crops that night. He saved my faith in the wisdom of paying attention to the world around us, of trusting the knowledge that comes from sources we don't always understand. As I write this story, Max is sleeping at my feet, just as he was on that warm September evening 2 years ago. But now I know that even in sleep, part of him is always listening, always ready to sound the alarm if danger threatens our home. Every farmer should be so lucky to have such a partner, loyal, brave, and blessed with senses that can detect trouble long before human awareness kicks in. Max didn't just bark at midnight. He barked to save everything we'd built together. Thank you so much for listening to this story about Max and our farm. It's a reminder that sometimes our four-legged friends know things we don't, and that paying attention to their warnings can make all the difference. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What part of the world are you listening from? And if you have your own stories about animals sensing danger or protecting their families, please share them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories from rural life and the incredible bonds between farmers and their animals. Until next time, trust your instincts, pay attention to your animals, and remember that sometimes the best early warning system has 4 legs and a wet nose.